everybody signed in? Can we start the meeting, please? Welcome everybody to the meeting, the scrutiny meeting. I'll go through the procedures. The fire alarm procedures. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase opposite the lifts in the foyer. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Could everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent, and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls when the meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will subsequently be broadcast on the internet. Does anybody intend to film the meeting? No. Are there any members who wish to speak under 20.1? No. I have not received any requests for public speaking. There's nobody in the public gallery. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have received apologies from the following members: Councillor Fellows, Councillor Austin, substituted by Councillor Garner, Councillor Moore, substituted by Councillor Wright. Are there any other apologies? Yes.
Councillor Curry.
Councillor Curry. Councillor Curry. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Good. Next item is to approve the minutes of the overview and scrutiny panel meeting held on the 16th of April 2024. You should have received a copy in the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer for acceptance of the minutes? Yes. And a seconder? Yes. Do members agree?
Agree, thank you.
It's agreed. The next item is the Cabinet Member presentation by Councillor Keane on the Youth Council and Youth Provision in Thanet. I'll call on Councillor Keane to make her presentation.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. When I got the invite originally, the focus was very much on the Youth Council and the successes of it and what had been achieved through it and where we were going in future. In this presentation you will see that we talk about a lot of other things like the titles up there other than just the Youth Council, and I think that's quite an important thing when you're looking at youth work, because the Youth Council, whereas it's something we're very proud of and we're building up, it's just one way of engaging with young people, and it's really important that we use the other things we do to get the fuller picture of what young people want and how we can involve them. So on this slide you've got the youth team projects, and you'll see one of the big things there is the knife awareness programme. Now, all these slides will be available to you after the meeting, and there's a wealth of information on there. So, I mean, I'm sure you'll find it very interesting, but I'm not going to go through the slides, you know, with all the detail tonight. And I'm much more interested in, after I've done the presentation, your questions and things you want to know more about. But as I say, knife crime awareness is something that has been a big part of the programme, because knife crime has been quite a problem in Thanet. It is reducing, but it is something that we're quite concerned about. I'll go through the other things on that slide as we work through them. Oh, right, sorry, yes. using my arrows. Okay, so the knife crime awareness programme is delivered in schools. It can also be delivered in other venues or on a one-to-one basis, and it's being delivered in 9 different schools and colleges at the moment, and is very successful. So it aims to raise awareness of knife crime, and make sure that young people know what is legal to carry, what is not. Also, you're probably aware and have probably seen the knife amnesty bins around the area, and that has been hugely successful in collecting, I don't know how many thousand knives now. No, it doesn't say on the slide, but it is a huge number, and that slide just gives you an example of what has been found in the amnesty bins. So it's certainly been a very successful initiative. Over 1,000 knives, it says, on the bins. With all the knives that have been collected, something that's going to happen later this year is East Kent College are going to use the knives to create a sculpture. This will be a mobile display that can then be taken to other places to, you know, get the message home about knives, but also to have something positive come out of what could be a very negative and dangerous thing. So it's quite an innovative idea, and we hope that it'll be displayed in a local art gallery. And that says about the sculpture. So the next slide is is about the Thanet Youth Council, which was established in November 2022, which I expect George remembers, or Councillor Cupp, I should say, remembers very well. And there's still your video up online for everyone who wants to see that. But it is something that we are really trying to take forward, because this is the most obvious voice of young people in its engagement with Thanet Council. So the Youth Council meets monthly, and they we try and make it as much as possible youth-led. So, I mean, Tracy Moon is the officer that has the sort of day-to-day responsibility for the organisation and running of it, but she takes a back seat and the young people actually chair the meetings, decide the agenda. So we really are trying to make it youth-led. But we have to go quite slowly. There's a number of things to bear in mind with the Youth Council. Usually the people that are involved with it are the older young people. Anyone from years 7 till 13 can be a member of the Youth Council, but obviously at the beginning of their senior school life, they're not so likely to get involved and engaged in something like this. It's likely to be the older ones. And then, of course, there's a limited number of years before they outgrow the age range for the council. So it's a constantly moving membership. Also, although we've got over 20 people signed up to it, they don't all come to every meeting, and partly that's because, you know, they've got their schoolwork, they've got their out-of-school lives as well, but also some people try it once and don't come back. I know Tracy works very hard in keeping the engagement going, contacting young people if they haven't turned up for a number of meetings, seeing if they're still interested. And also when people first come along, they might, you know, be interested, but then actually making that first move to come along to a sort of quite formal environment. We have the Youth Council meetings either in the chamber or in the Austin room, and that's to give young people again the chance to really appreciate, you know, sort of what happens in a council building. So I think it's a very genuine experience for young people. But as I say, it takes time to build up their confidence, and also we don't want to impose an agenda on them. So, for example, what they have decided is going to be something that they want to work with is community safety, and in particular safe spaces for young people. But they're also quite interested in safe spaces for everybody, and we've talked a lot about things like, you know, in parks, are they safe? Do they feel safe there? And so it's something that is an ongoing piece of work. One thing they have achieved, and it might sound quite a little thing, but it was a very interesting process watching them negotiate it, is they've designed their own Thanet Youth Council logo. And as I say, that might sound a very simple thing, but they had to learn how to negotiate with each other to agree one sort of end product. The other thing they've talked a lot about is trying to publicise it more and how young people get the information about it. Now, Tracy and her team do a lot of work in schools, as some of the other slides will show, and obviously they always introduce the idea of the Youth Council whenever it's appropriate in that work. But young people do a lot on social media these days, so the young people very much recognised that they needed something, you know, sort of Instagram, social media reach to engage more young people. And also then, it's not just the people that come to the council, it means that it's easy for other young people that might just be interested in what's happening there to get that information too. Oh, I've gone one on. So, I don't know if people have heard of Park Life. Been along to Park Life at all? No? Because again, this is a multi-agency outdoor event that is held twice a year, aimed at 11 to 25-year-olds. And so there's a variety of different stalls and activities, and the idea is that young people come along and they can interact with the police, the youth service. They had wild swimming there, like at the one I went to, all sorts of activities and things for young people. But also, again, the young people from the Youth Council, they have a stall there, so again they can talk to young people and encourage them to join the Youth Council or find out more about what it does. And there's pictures of the stalls from one of them on a not very sunny day, but you can't guarantee the weather. There's also the Ellington Park Youth Cafe, and in a way that's a similar sort of initiative where it's a multi-agency approach, and so Ellington Park can be a hub for some antisocial behaviour, as most parks can, and so the Friends of Ellington Park, who are a very active group, and other agencies, have provided this safe space for people to hang out, but it also means, as I say, they can link with other agencies, other avenues of support there, and so that's another initiative again that the Youth Council may be involved in by people going along there. There seems to be quite a few slides on Ellington Park, but as I say, you will get all these slides. The ladder of risk is something that is taken into schools for young people when they're making that transition into senior school. And I mean, it's a fascinating interactive activity whereby young people are given cards of what could be risky situations, alcohol, social media, things like that, and they're asked to place them where they think they are on a ladder of risk. And so this opens up conversations about, you know, how young people will, you know, what they consider dangerous, but also how they can look after themselves. So it's a tool for sort of learning for them. And I don't know, well, I know a couple of you went to the pickleball opening just the other day, but that's been something that this is all about, engaging young people in activity, in things like sports, but also, you know, getting them to do something sort of constructive and productive to discourage antisocial behaviour. Also, the more our parks and open spaces are used for activities, the safer they are for everyone, and the less likely antisocial behaviour is to happen. So Safety in Action is an awareness week, another multi-agency event. And I think that's the thing with all these things. It's really important to try and get young people in touch with all the different agencies, both that can support them, but also so they see them as a positive interaction and not distant from them as young people. And obviously bullying is something that a lot of young people experience and has obviously very negative effects. And so it's about looking at things like that and how young people can keep themselves safe. The pickleball courts are now open in Broadstairs, and it's great fun. So there's going to be sort of more courses or more sessions in the summer. The courts are free, they're open all the time, except they'll probably have to shut in the evening to keep them from vandalism and that. But it is a free activity, and there are going to be sessions. Obviously, you will hear more about them for all age groups, but young people as well. And there they are. Thanet Games, obviously we've got the Olympics, and this is our own Olympics. So again, it's clubs coming together, activities for all age groups. There's going to be a young people's events in July, and then adult events in August, and then a closing ceremony at the end of the Adults Week. And so it's, again, looking at the young, well, all ages, but young people's activities and how they can engage with them and, you know, how they can keep safe. Obviously, it's not just Thanet District Council that provides activities for young people. We've got the Pie Factory, which I expect most people know about. Obviously, there are funding issues around that, but sessions like this do a lot of good for young people, and so it is about making sure young people know about them and can access them, and looking as time goes forward as to how we can support them when funding can become difficult. We've also got, obviously, Kent County Council are responsible for some youth services, and then we've got things like Porchlight and Changing Minds, and well, a whole wealth of other organisations that work across the district for young people. So, in going forward, park life continues to grow and develop, and new agencies join. So that's something that is a growing model and a good way of engaging young people and getting the information to them. Thanet Youth Council is looking for more members. One of the questions you asked for this session was about, you know, how many people go, how do they get to know about the council. At the moment, on most meetings, we probably have about half a dozen young people coming. So it's a fairly small number, even of the 20 that are, you know, current members. But we are looking how we can grow that. One of the things that we are doing, I think, is on the next slide. No, hang on.
This one.
Eh?
Council.
Where's that? Is that the next one?
No, first
No.
one.
First one, sorry. Oh yes, growing numbers, yeah. But we're looking at an event, a schools forum in Broadstairs, which Councillor Bright has been instrumental in, because most schools have a school council, so it's a similar sort of model, and it's about looking at whether any of the people from the school council would be interested in joining the youth service, but also how we can meet up the people that are already on the school councils and what they want to achieve and their wishes and goals and that with the youth council. So getting the crossover of ideas and maybe ideas for the youth council to take forward, as well as possibly new members. In terms of members, as I say, it's years 7 to 13, and so anyone can join from any school, and if they're interested, they just need to contact Tracy Moon, and she can, or her team, and she can give them all the information. One of the things that you as councillors could do is make sure that young people in your area know about it. So if you have ways like through your newsletters, or if you have Facebook pages of that, of signposting it, that would be very helpful. I think we've probably covered most of these things. Oh, yes, there you are. And so we've come to any questions. Yeah, sorry, I because I'd kind of talked through the slides, I'd kind of covered the information I wanted to from those slides, but you will all get the slides as a pack, so you'll get all the information that's on them. But as I say, I think more importantly, it's what questions you want to ask me.
I have a simple one to start with. What's the size of the youth team that you mentioned at the start?
I think I'm going to hand over to Penny, yeah.
We don't have a youth team, it's the community team, so this is only a very small part of their work, and there is 5 of them plus the manager.
I worked with Tracy when I was working for Charlton with young people, and it's in safe hands. She's the right person for the job, totally and utterly. And obviously I come from a 26-year teaching background, and I've got a huge passion for young people, and actually feel that they need to be front and centre a lot more than they actually are. Have you thought of allocating, or have we thought of allocating the young people a small budget so that they can actually learn to, I've got 3 or 4 questions, they can actually learn to lead on a project and manage the project from start to finish with a small financial... Yep.
They have a small budget. At the moment, it's only £1,000, but for exactly that reason, and they are currently looking at what project they want to do to use that money. So it will be teaching them project management skills as well.
My next question is, being that I'm 62 next birthday, I think there's less mileage in surveying me as a resident and more mileage in actually surveying young people. Has we, TDC, ever considered surveying young people in a similar way to which we do adults, about what they think about the services we provide and what they'd like to see in their communities? I mean, I think this could be simply done by accessing the young people through schools and youth clubs, but it would certainly be interesting to see whether their views and wishes and desires for the community actually matches people like me, who are at the other end, really.
Yeah, I mean, strangely enough, the young people have actually surveyed young people. Now, and again, this is where I say we have to take it quite slowly with them, because I'm sure there's much more information that we would like to gather about, you know, what their issues are and what they would like to see. And I particularly am interested in your idea about, you know, them actually commenting on council services per se, but what they did do is, and you know, sort of have done, like you know, the community events that they've been at, and also within their schools, and that is to gather young people's views on what their main issues are, and that's how they came up with the priority of safety. That was the thing that kept coming up with young people.
Funding is a big issue for youth services, and obviously most of that funding comes via KCC. I believe we should be working more collaboratively across the three levels of governance, town, district and county, to ensure maximum benefits to each of our funding pots. But I'm particularly interested in the levelling up money and the new 20 million that we have coming into Ramsgate, and I'd welcome again making sure young people sit centre and front with some of that funding that particularly is coming into Ramsgate, and I'd certainly like to see some of that money allocated
Councillor
to activities
Wing,
and services
could we
for
stick
them.
to questions, please?
That was a question. My question is, will the council, will we consider allocating money particularly to support young people in our communities, particularly levelling up money and the new 20 million coming into Ramsgate?
My answer is I hope so. I mean, obviously all this funding has, you know, a lot of conditions tied to it, and so we would need to look at what the capacity is for focusing on young people like that. Some of the projects, I mean, like for example the Margate Skate Park, are already focused on young people, but I agree with you, it would be good to see more focus on it, to see how all the projects we're doing could involve or be of benefit to young people.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. As far as I'm aware, the Police and Crime Commissioner allocates about 30k to Thanet District Council. Is there an opportunity here, talking about crime, you know, I think the first thing you said was like knife amnesty, to give our young people a bit of freedom with that money, to try and tackle crime head on? Because sometimes we sit here as adults and think the best way, but actually sometimes they're a bit more creative. So I just wondered if we can tap into that money.
They don't actually give us the money in terms of we're allowed it and we can spend what we like. We have to put together project plans beforehand, which is what some of these projects have come out of, that money. And they talk to the youth council about things like that. So the intelligence we get back is fed into that. But we could talk to them about whether there's anything extra they could give to youth council. As so far we haven't been successful, but there is always that option. Unfortunately, we used to get a pot of money that we could spend on whatever we liked within the element. Now we have to have sort of funding and ideas up front, which they have to agree. So it's not quite as simple as it used to be, unfortunately.
And sorry, on that note, I'd just like to add that the young people do go along to the IAG meetings and do speak out. So although they haven't got any money from it yet, I mean, they are involved in talking about young people's safety in that kind of forum.
And then the other question is, how involved are they in the actual levelling up ideas, things like the skate park and things like that, bearing in mind it's designed for for their generation. Thanks.
So they have been involved. Louise brings things to the Youth Council and they discuss it. It was on one of the slides that unfortunately was spelt incorrectly. I did notice afterwards. It's a regeneration as opposed to a regeneration team. Yeah, they do attend and talk about that sort of stuff, so they are involved in it. And we are encouraging any decisions that we make to try and incorporate the Youth Council if it fits within the timelines for some of the things that we do. So yeah, they are.
Thank you. Winding back to the knife sculptures and the knife crime, is there anywhere in Thanet that we've got bleed packs?
Yes, there are. So they were supplied by the Violence Reduction Unit from Kent Police, and they are located in police vehicles, and they have varying size ones, and at some strategic locations, which off the top of my head I can't remember, but I will find out and get back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keane, for the presentation as well. You know that youth engagement is an absolute priority for me, and I'm quite interested in the Ellington Park Youth Cafe. Is that actually a TDC initiative or is it run by volunteers? If it is a TDC initiative, are there any plans to roll that out in other towns? Thank you.
So it is run by the volunteers, obviously with us, and our support, and Kent Police's and a few other people's. It's a trial for May and June this year. So if it is successful and it's something we can carry on forward, then yes, absolutely, it would be something we could look to roll out in other places if they have a similar setup with a safe place. So obviously it's got the cafe there, so people can attend specifically the cafe location. But yeah, it's a work in progress on that one.
That's really good news. Thank you. So I'm sure we'd like to do something in Broadstairs with the little music room there in Piermont Park. I think that would be a perfect place for a youth cafe. And also just something that wasn't mentioned here, but was I think was a real success, was at the Climate Change CAG. We had representatives from Charles Dickens and St George's who were engaged with regarding the cycle and walking network, Sustrans. And that was brilliant, and I would really welcome more of that. So I think if we could involve kids and bring them into council meetings, it was so successful. They had so much to say, so I definitely would like to see more of that. Thank you.
So that's completely outside of this particular area. It does happen to sit in my area, so I do know about it. And it was specific around that particular project, which is why Morgan was quite keen to bring them in, because it has a massive impact, and we had already, or Sustrans had already spoken to them about how it would work for them and how to make their journeys to school easier and safer. So yeah, that's on a separate piece of work, so it's not really the community team leading on it, and I think there is something that I know Nick's team have considered and always are looking for youth voices around things that we do. So I think there is, yeah, as and when we can bring them in, we do, I think is probably the answer to that question.
Come in on that, because they did get invited to the plastic-free Thanet working group as well, and I think that's the thing. It's also for councillors, because of course they can get involved on a area, town level as well. It doesn't have to be just Thanet Council as a whole. So if there are initiatives going on in your locality that you would like the voice of young people for, then again, if you talk to Tracy, we can ask if there are volunteers to do that. And for all the things that, you know, have been suggested to them so far, they've always responded very positively, and you know, there has been people willing to be the representative. And they've also worked with Kent County Council, Youth Council, so they're very keen to look for opportunities. Even though they're quite a small group, they are really keen on, you know, doing the role to the best of their ability.
Thank you. There's no question. It's just a comment, if I may, Chair. Just to say thank you for this presentation. It's really encouraging to see how everything's still progressing. It's really lovely to see the Youth Council's in a safe pair of hands as well and really progressing well. And I think this is one area of the council that we don't shout loud enough about. You know, the work that goes on is massive and has a very big impact on a lot of people's lives, especially obviously young people. And I do think we need to make sure that we're shouting a little bit louder about the fantastic work that's going on by the Thanet Community Safety Team as well. Thank you, Chair.
Could I ask, is it possible to share more of what the Youth Council are talking about with councillors?
Yes.
Because A, councillors could pass it on to youths in their wards, but B, I'm sure most councillors would really like to know.
We can put it in the loop. We can use methods like that to make sure that everyone is aware of what they're doing. That's a good idea.
I think Heather will take it forward. I mean, I don't want to put specifics on it because I think it needs to be led from the children. Maybe I'm just sowing some seeds. But by the looks of it, it's progressing well and, you know, everybody involved should be congratulating themselves.
Do know, as I say, sort of Penny as leading it is absolutely passionate about it and young people, so she's doing brilliant work. And sorry, Tracy. Tracy, as well as Penny. Yeah, you didn't know. Yeah,
Brilliant work. Tracy's doing that.
Yeah.
Can we please note the report and thank both of you for your presentation? Thank you. Do we have to vote on that? We don't have to vote on noting the report, do we?
That's fine.
Next item is item 5, the Port of Ramsgate maintenance dredging. To call on Mike to make a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report describes the proposed plan for maintenance dredging at the Port of Ramsgate for this financial year. The dredging plan will require a key decision to undertake a single dredging campaign with an estimated value of £362,000. This proposal will be recommended to Cabinet on the 30th of May, and if approved, the work will be undertaken via an existing 4+1 year maintenance dredging term contract that was awarded to the marine contractor Van Ord in 2021. The total value of the 2024-25 dredging plan is £477,000, and the budget value this year is £325,000. So it will therefore also be recommended on the 30th of May that Cabinet approves a one-off general fund revenue budget virement from the corporate contingency budget to fund the estimated £152,000 shortfall. The proposed dredging is via a method known as hydrodynamic dredging, which mobilises deposited sediments back into the water column. The suspended sediment then leaves the harbour on a falling tide. Hydrodynamic dredging methods have been used at Ramsgate for approximately 12 years and have proven to be more financially efficient than mechanical methods such as grab dredging. Previous hydrodynamic dredging campaigns at Ramsgate have delivered present day value productivity rates of about £2 per metre cubed of sediment removed, and by comparison mechanical dredging will cost more and probably in the region of £3.50 per metre cubed of sediment. The dredging plan this year will focus on the port turning circle, the port entrance, the harbour entrance and the approach to berth 4-5. The Council has a contractual obligation to provide vessels with access to berth 4-5 for the purpose of discharging cargoes to the Brett Aggregates site. The volume of sediment to be removed during this dredging campaign is approximately 124,000 cubic metres, so which for context is roughly the same in volume as the water held in 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's important that dredging at the port is undertaken within the next 1 to 2 months to maintain an acceptable depth of water in the port at all states of tide. It also makes sense to plan this work over the summer to avoid the increased bad weather risk associated with winter dredging. In order to secure the dredger in June, an order has been placed for a smaller 75,000 cubic metre dredging campaign at an estimated cost of £228,000. This will improve vessel access, but without the more substantial dredging campaign that we're discussing here, there is a greater chance that we would need to undertake further work later in the financial year. The approval of the proposed key decision will increase the quantity of dredging undertaken, allowing for a greater depth to be achieved across the entire area to be dredged. Environmental monitoring will be undertaken alongside the dredging operation to mitigate the risk of adverse effects on nearby receptors. This is important as the port is in close proximity to multiple designated sites that are rich in biodiversity. The dredging planned for the port in June will take 2 to 3 weeks to complete. Engagement will take place with stakeholders at the port and the harbour, and updates will be provided as required via our usual communication channels, which includes our Notice to Mariners service. The plan for this year can be found at Appendix A of the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors?
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question.
Councillor Scobie.
Thank you. Can I ask a question, but then also potentially come in later on a debate with a discussion? Thank you. Thank you for the report. I wondered if you could just give a bit more information about some of the legal impacts of not doing it. In the report, it talks about that we might be breaching the open port duty, potentially opening ourselves up for legal claims from vessels damaged, and there could be an impact on future revenue. Can you just give a bit more detail on that, please?
Yes, certainly. So, Thanet District Council is a statutory harbour authority. So there is an act, the 1934 Corporation Act of Ramsgate, which makes us a statutory harbour authority, and that means that we have duties under that, under the Harbour Act and that legislation, to conserve or maintain the port estate, and that includes dredging. So there is an obligation to dredge to allow vessel access. If we don't do that, then there's obviously a safety risk for vessels navigating in the port, because they may run aground, cause damage, or and safe, obviously risk of safety to people on those vessels, and also it would impede trade, and because there's an act saying that the statutory harbour, as a statutory harbour authority, we're an open port. We must remain open and the berths be accessible. Okay.
Thank you very much for the report. Can I just ask about the overspend? Because it looks like the budget, forgive me if I paraphrase, it looks like the budget's been reduced year on year, which is why we're now in an overspend at the point where we actually need to do the work. Did we arrive in that place? Was that something that was planned, that we would reduce, in knowing that when we actually need to do the work there would be an overspend and therefore the contingency would cover it?
The budget has reduced over years. So the report talks about what the value of the budget in 2013, when we last had a scheduled cross-channel service, and it's gradually reduced over time to a point where the budget wasn't sufficient to be able to undertake maintenance dredging. And in the budget this year, there's an extra 180,000 that's been put in to the revenue budget for dredging in response to that being raised through the Council's Star Chamber process last year, where we're looking at budget growth items. So I think it's recognised that the reductions in the dredging budget available, the maintenance dredging budget available, meant that there was too little money in the budget to be able to sustain or maintain the dredge depth, and that's why that money was put back in. We do what's called hydrographic monitoring, so we monitor the dredge depth 3 times a year, and that monitoring has shown that there was quite a lot of accretion, so quite a lot of material came in over the winter. We were already at a level where we needed to do dredging, but more material was coming over the winter, and that has led to this situation where when we do the volumetric calculation on how much dredging is required to get to a particular target depth, has meant that we need to spend more than the budget that's available, and that's what's led to that proposal to increase the budget by £152,000 to enable us to dredge to a level that continues to comply with our duty.
May I just ask a follow-up question? Is there some thought or some investigation into whether the new method of dredging, as opposed to grab dredging, might be responsible for the extra need? Because if I understand correctly, it disperses sediment which could potentially come back, which looks like it's been doing over the last 12 years, as opposed to grab dredging, which would actually displace it altogether. So with regard to that, has there been some evidence or audit into that being it's obviously been more cost effective year on year, but over time, has that been looked into, whether it's been more cost effective over time to do that method as opposed to the other?
No, not as such. I mean, the way this, so any port or harbour interrupts the currents and the longshore drift process, and material that's in the water column and suspended all the time that water is passing along the coast. As soon as that goes into a port, the conditions by which it stays suspended disappear, because the water goes into a port and it slows down, and then that material falls out of suspension. What water injection dredging or hydrodynamic dredging does is it puts that material back into what's called a density cloud. So it's not just sort of agitating it and putting it all over the place in the water. It's creating a dense cloud of material near the bed still, which on a falling tide, and it's important it's only done on a falling tide, then leaves the harbour via gravity, because it's heavier than the water around it. As soon as it gets out into the current, it then is taken with the current back on the path that it would have taken had the port not been there. So the material that leaves the harbour isn't necessarily the material that's coming back in. There is a complex offshore system of sand and sediment that travels along the shore. It feeds offshore sandbanks like the Goodwins, and it travels quite a long distance. So there's a possibility that some of the material, some of the particles that have left will come back again, but it is a longshore drift process, and that material passing by that is effectively captured by the port because it is there, and most ports have some sort of dredging requirement. If you can have a port that doesn't require dredging, that's quite an unusual thing. Okay.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I think something comes out to me from what's just been discussed about the fact that the reason we've got to spend this amount of money now, as Councillor Faruqi rightly drew out, we haven't spent it when we perhaps needed to. So that effectively means that the losses that we've already experienced and seen quoted for the port and harbour are actually worse than we've known. That's the effective outcome of this, because now we're having to wire money from other budgets to cover what wasn't done in the past. The first question that really I'd like to know is, and obviously we want the best possible facilities for vessels. However, it's substantially more expensive to dredge to 4 metres against chart datum to 3.5. In fact, to the tune of about 50,000.
Is there a question, Councillor?
My question is, where it clearly states that the idea of dredging the approach to berths 4 and 5 is to extend the landing window, that's effectively for one operator and Brett's, because nobody else uses those berths. And in fact, Brett's haven't been using them because they haven't put the superstructure on there. Do we really need to spend that money, or would it be better, perhaps? I understand the benefit of going for the bigger project all in one hit, but at the moment there wouldn't be really any gain, and that's just dredging it for it to silt up again.
Can you answer that, or is that beyond your...
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I mean, I think the sort of concise answer is yes, we do need to do that. We have a contractual obligation to do that because of the contract with the lease and facilities agreement with Brett Aggregates, and as an open port, we have an obligation to do so as well. So no, there isn't an option not to dredge.
No, but what percentage of the... Sorry, Sharon. What percentage of the overall budget here is actually for that approach to berths 4 and 5 rather than maintaining access so the wind farms can get in and out?
So we're dredging to that depth to allow... I mean, you always need to dredge for the largest vessels that the port is accommodating. And you're right, those largest vessels are vessels that go into berth 4-5 at the moment. It is being used because the vessel, the DC Valandrin, is coming in. And obviously the berth, when it's operational with a conveyor on it, that will mean there'll be coasters coming into that berth as well. The dredging is not only for for Brett Aggregates and for the vessels that visit berth 4-5. The dredging is at the port entrance where there's a sandbar that's gradually moving across the port entrance, so we need to remove that. It's at the harbour entrance, so where there's sand around the port control area between the east and west pier, and it's in the turning circle which benefits any vessel that's entering the port area, because it's about maintaining a much longer and better tidal window in the main port turning circle area for all vessels.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. I sort of welcome this dredging, as I suspect quite a number of boat owners and larger vessel owners welcome. I understand the now we've got an overspend that we need to address, and perhaps with hindsight we should have allocated some money coming forward to address this, but we haven't, and it needs to be done. I have got a number of questions, so I'll take them one at a time, Mike. I've done the swim from Ramsgate to Broadstairs on that current. It's really easy. And I crewed on a yacht, so I know there is a strip of water just outside the harbour entrance that either goes that way or that way, depending on whether the tide's rising or falling, and it's a very tricky piece of water. So I'm making the assumption that on a falling tide, that it is that will be heading towards Sandwich Bay rather than Broadstairs. So most of the sediment will head towards Sandwich, am I thinking, and the Pegwell Bay, or?
If I answer that one first, no, actually, on a falling tide, the particles travel sort of roughly in a northeasterly direction, so they don't go round to Pegwell Bay. That environmental monitoring I spoke about, one of the elements of that is transect monitoring on the chalk reef at Pegwell. What we need to make sure, obviously, is that sediment doesn't come out and do what you described and go round onto the chalk reef and smother the mussel beds and shellfish beds. So during that dredging, there will be regular daily monitoring to make sure that that's not happening. And we know from experience that the time to stop in the tidal cycle, the time to stop hydrodynamic dredging, to avoid that. So it's very important that we stick to a 6-hour window of dredging on each tide cycle, so that it's only when those particles will be travelling away and out rather than round the corner and landing on the shore.
Thank you. Also, I the harbour entrance is a big problem. There was footage last week of a yacht getting stuck coming in. I think it was a fairly low tide, and they just got trapped and had to wait for the tide to rise. So there is a particular problem below the east pier, below the port office or the brasserie, the harbour brasserie, where a beach has developed. So I'm not quite certain how this blow system, if you like, would address that, because we've always had the grab bucket. Will this system address that particular problem?
Yes. So I keep referring to hydrodynamic dredging, and that's because there's more than one method. And the vessel that Van Ord are bringing to Ramsgate for this campaign is capable of what's called water injection dredging, which we use for the majority of the sediment to be removed, which is a very fine silt. So water injection dredging is high volume but low pressure. So it lifts the silt and then it falls under gravity as this density cloud. The alternative method of hydrodynamic dredging is something called mass flow, which is high volume, high pressure, where instead of having lots and lots of nozzles underneath the dredger that gradually agitates and suspends the sediment, it effectively pushes larger, coarser material, such as sand, and it's effectively sweeping it. And that is the method that will be used around the port entrance and the harbour entrance to push the sand back out into the flow. And again, that sand, although it's coarser, it is also readily mobilised once we get out into those currents that we know exist outside the port entrance. And that's very clearly evidenced by the fact that the port is served by an approach channel, and that approach channel was dredged in 1980, and we monitor it every year as we're required to do, but we've never had to re-dredge that. And the reason for that is because the conditions that exist there mean that sand can't drop out of suspension into that area. So we know that when we dredge through hydrodynamic dredging and push sand into that area, it will be taken away by natural currents as if the port weren't there, basically.
I've got 2 questions. Well, sorry, they're small ones. I know there's a big problem in the inner harbour because a lot of boat owners approach me directly, and the level of sediment is raising and it's meeting the bottom of their boats. Have we any plans to address that particular issue?
Yeah, so there isn't anything under this dredging plan. So we have done, in last financial year, we did some targeted grab dredging in the inner marina. But there aren't, so I think we were talking about the locked marina we were talking about. There aren't any plans in this plan, in this financial year. But again, it's something through our hydrographic surveys that we'll monitor and put that into the plan when we next need to. That will be grab dredging. We can't use water injection dredging in the inner marina because you'll just basically push it into the outer marina and then have to move it again. So.
My last question is: Do you feel that once we've got this period of dredging done, that there's a good plan going forward, and that we're never going to have a period of no dredging, which then creates the problem we've got now?
No, I think by its nature, it's. I mean, we do maintenance dredging every year. We're doing more this year because of the levels that have been deposited over quite a long period of time. But next year we'll need to do more dredging. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you. I've got a couple, then I'll come back to you. Does any of this sand and silt end up on Ramsgate Main Sands?
Probably not. Some of the sand may do. In fact, if we dredge using a grab dredging method, there is a licensed disposal site for clean sand just off Ramsgate Main Beach. So if we used grab dredging and used that site, it would almost certainly come back onto Ramsgate Beach. But this is the same material that is already on the beach. We're not putting anything there that isn't in the natural system already. But through this method and this technique, it probably won't come back round onto the beach. It'll probably go further away.
Contamination. on the beach? I mean, how clean is it?
So, yeah, generally speaking, this is sediment that exists outside the harbour as well. So this isn't a foreign material that's put there and then taken out of the harbour. As part of the marine licensing requirements, generally, not for this water injection dredging, but generally we have a dredging licence which requires sampling. So that sampling, we take samples and send that off to the laboratory where it's tested for various contaminants, heavy metals, things like that. So we have a pretty good idea what's in the material, but generally speaking, this is material that's come in through the port entrance and fallen out of suspension, and particularly where we're taking the top layers off, where we're talking about here, it hasn't fallen out of suspension very long ago, so it's relatively clean material, really.
Final question, perhaps a bit naive. Longer term, is it possible to reduce the ingress of sand or silt into the...
Very difficult to engineer a harbour where you don't need to do any dredging. It's not easy to stop it coming in. It's very variable. So when we have sustained northeasterly storms, and we've had a few of those over the winter, we get more material coming in. If we have, if we go back to when there was last a scheduled cross-channel service, the natural movement of large vessels tends to limit the amount that falls out of suspension. So although it comes in, those vessels moving around help to maintain it in suspension, and it goes out with the falling tide. So you actually end up with less material staying when you've got lots of vessel movements. But in terms of actually stopping it coming in, no, there's not really a method of doing that at Ramsgate. Historically, of course, the inner marina at Ramsgate the crosswall and inner marina was designed to flush the harbour of silt. That was what it was there for. There were sluices that flushed it out. So there was an old method of doing it without dredging, but that's not very compatible with having a marina in there.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Davis, in one of his questions, mentioned that the port is losing money. I think we had a question on this at G&A, and I think last financial year it didn't lose money. Can you just clarify for somebody relatively new to the council what the position of the port is, and if those losses are real losses or the result of depreciation and amortisation?
Yes, so every year we publish annual accounts on the port and the harbour. If we take the port position without the depreciation element, then it's close to break even or break even. It certainly has been in recent years, or it makes us a relatively small loss. If you include the depreciation part, which is not something that has an impact on taxpayers, it's not a direct revenue loss. But if you include that, then the reported loss is much higher. So somewhere like £1 million more, or that sort of value.
Chair, if I may, just a follow-up question. Can you explain to me what the corporate contingency budget is that this is coming from? And with that, which I'm assuming is a reserve, and if that budget is reduced this year, presumably it will need to be replenished from revenue in the next budget. But will and again, this may be a question for finance team, I don't know, but when they were setting that reserve, would they have assumed potential costs related to doing this dredging, so that the funds going back into the revenue from a revenue budget will be less than the original amount because this money has now been spent?
This is the point where I hoped that there would be a finance colleague next to me, but no, it is a reserve. So yes, it's the corporate contingency it is a reserve. As for something, it is there to cover such eventualities as this. As for the position of it next year and assumptions, I think I might have to come back to you on that after consulting with, with the head of finance.
That would be helpful, and just the rationale behind that is just understanding how we factor in reserves at this point. Is it just a amount of money we put there as a rainy day fund, or are we building it around scenarios? And if that scenario then comes that money spent, do we then have 2 or 3 years to put that money back? Because it's unlikely you would have the same risk or scenario happen in multiple years. So I'd appreciate if you could follow up on that. Thank you.
Do members have any recommendations to forward to Cabinet? No? Then thank you very much for your... So item 6, which I'm not quite sure what the title is. It's approval for various policies for the
tenant and leaseholder services.
For the tenant and leaseholder services, and it's being presented by Sally O'Sullivan.
Thank you. So back in October 2020, the tenant and leaseholder services transitioned from East Kent Housing, and at that point in time we adopted new landlord compliance policies. They are basically for our tenants' health and safety. They were drafted for us by a consultant, and they were very robust due to the position we were in terms of being under notice by the regulator for social housing at the time. Policies need to be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure they are still working in the way they are intended and are kept up to date with current legislation or regulations. The policies are brought for review today are gas safety, electrical safety, passenger lifts, water hygiene and asbestos. The fire safety policy was reviewed and adopted in June 23 following the introduction of the Building Safety Act 2022 and the strengthening of the fire safety regulations. The changes made to the policies are removal of repetition and thus shortening them considerably, ensuring the policies reflect current legislation, regulation and best practice, the removal of references to other council departments, and a complete review of the reporting regime. So we provide reports to enable us to monitor our programmes, take appropriate actions when necessary and to give assurance. At the point of transition, it was important that we had robust reporting with early warning systems in place. We've looked to reduce the reporting through these new policies as the compliance work streams are now operating as business as usual rather than in recovery, and that means much of the reporting now is redundant. We can still provide assurance with a high-level overview of our compliance position with commentary that would explain any fluctuations in the statistics. And any cause for concern is escalated immediately and dealt with at the time. And this would be reflected through the performance reports with an explanation in the commentary. Are there any questions?
I was just going to ask, can you clarify how often these policies are reviewed and updated? I know that it mentions in the report that they were written in 2020 and that one of them, due to legislation changes, was updated last year. But how often, as a normal sort of cycle, are they being reviewed and updated?
We review our policies every 2 to 3 years. And if there is known changes in legislation, we would review and rewrite and bring to the table at that point in time.
I noticed that the Thanet tenants and leaseholders group have been consulted over these. Did they make any comments? No. Any other questions? Councillor Scobie.
I was just going to ask as a follow-up, would it not be normal for a policy to be updated annually and for any learnings from there or legislation change to be adopted? 2 to 3 years feels quite a long time, particularly with some of these areas you're talking about, for example, water safety, fire safety. These things are changing quite often. In a business setting, for example, these policies, as a rule of thumb, would be reviewed quarterly and updated by management annually. So I'm just wondering why the disparity with the council.
That is what we have done since we've come back in-house for all of our policies, is to review them every 2 to 3 years. We do have a regular review of our service, which includes our policies. If during one of the reviews we did find that a policy wasn't working for us, or through a complaint there is a lessons learnt, that means there's a policy change, or of course regulation or legislation needs a change, then we would pull it out of its usual cycle and carry out a review of that policy at that time. But it's not currently the practice in my department to do that.
Sorry, just to follow up from that, then under 3.4 in the report, it says that at the time of transition, the council under notice from the regulator for social housing due to failings. Can you just give a bit more detail on that? For somebody relatively new to the council, just the background to that comment. I didn't understand the context of that.
So I'll start off, and then if I miss anything, Sally can cover that as well. So for those of you that weren't around in 2020, there was one of the most significant reasons why the decision was taken to disband East Kent Housing and bring the service back in-house was in relation to compliance. And that wasn't just Thanet Council, but it was the other 3 councils that were involved in East Kent Housing as well. And collectively, we all took the decision pretty much at the same time that that arrangement wasn't working for our residents, and particularly in relation to tenant health and safety and statutory compliance. Probably the thing that most highlighted it for everybody was failures in gas safety. What I could only describe as misinformation coming from East Kent Housing about the number of outstanding gas safety certificates across our housing stock and across the housing stock of the other 3 councils, which is why that decision was taken. But at the same time, the council also, and this is all documented in the reports that came forward at the time, but at the same time the council took the decision to self-refer to the regulator on the basis that we weren't meeting the required standards set out in the regulations for regulated social landlords. And we went through, after bringing the service back in-house, actually Sally and I sat through, I think, monthly meetings with the regulator to track our progress on compliance. That was, and part of that was the first iteration of these policies back in 2020. Obviously I'm pleased to be able to say that we worked through that process to the satisfaction of the regulator, and we put all the policies in place, and we've made significant progress on statutory compliance across the housing stock, and obviously the regulator removed the regulation notice on the council. I think in 2020, either early 2022 or late 21. Mm-hmm. So, and since that time, we've been running the compliance service pretty much as a business as usual arrangement. There's always things to do in compliance. It's just the way these things, are. For every landlord, there's always something to do in compliance. There's always new risk assessments, and risk assessments almost always have some actions attached to them. But what we can say with confidence now, which we couldn't say in 2020, is that we do have those risk assessments in place. We know what actions are flowing from those risk assessments, and we know which actions have been delivered and which ones are still to be done, and we report on those regularly, and you see those reports here on a quarterly basis. There's a really long backstory to the compliance picture, but I think we can say with confidence that we are in a pretty good place now in terms of our housing statutory compliance position.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yep.
I'd just like to make a comment. Obviously, I was...
No question. You got a question?
It's sort of a question, but I'd just like to thank the housing team because I was here, so maybe it's giving Councillor Scobie a bit more information, and I can say my residents were wholly unhappy with East Kent Housing, as were members, because we weren't listened to and they weren't listened to. So I'd just like to thank the housing department for getting the ship back on a even keel and heading in the right direction. A great deal of work has been undertaken, and I get fewer referrals from my residents as a consequence because they're happier and there's greater engagement between TDC staff and actually residents. So I think you deserve a pat on the back.
Thank you, Councillor Wing. I'm sure we all feel that way. Thank you. Next item is item 7, to establish the Overview and Scrutiny Panel work programme for 2024-25. Are there any updates from the External Grant Funding Review Working Party? Unfortunately, Councillor leading it is not here. Could you?
Yes, I believe we've just established a date for our second meeting following the scoping meeting. I'll just check what it is on the calendar there, unless Charles has got it to hand. 6th of June. So there'll be a second meeting then where we'll be addressing the items that were identified in the scoping. So I hope that's okay with everybody updated on Tricia's behalf.
Councillor Edwards and Councillor Scobie would like to take part in the grant funding review project. Does the panel agree that we co-opt Councillor Edwards and Councillor Will Scobie?
Can I just?
Yep, please do.
It's just, that shouldn't be co-opt, it should just be added as members of the group. That's just to make it absolutely clear.
Who was it exactly again?
So it's,
Councillor Will Scobie and Councillor Edwards.
Edwards, sorry. Sorry.
and also that Councillor Manners was previously added to it as a co-optee, so it's best if we just make him a member in the same way that we're adding those two councillors there.
Yeah, and just for my understanding, for future working parties, would you be able to sort of clarify how the chair is chosen? Because at the last meeting, Councillor Fellows announced that Councillor Austin would be chairing it. But my understanding is that working party or chairs of any committees are chosen at their first meeting. And secondly, how does the membership of working parties be set? Obviously, there isn't like political balance, but I'm assuming it's just set by the committee. I wasn't really clear on that. And then, is there any limit on the number of working parties that are allowed at one time? I think at the moment the convention has been to have one at a time and then wait for that one to finish and start. Is that correct?
I think the limit is dependent on the coverage that the Democratic Services team can handle.
Do you want me to come back on those?
Yeah,
so trying to think. So yes, it is the number of excuse me, the number of working parties is determined by the level of resource that the Dem Services team has. Currently, that is one. I'm not saying that there will be more. I've no indication there would be more resource to the team. But if there was more resource to the team, then obviously we'd be able to do more sort of support meetings. With regards to the membership, there is, as you say, there is no political balance on a scrutiny review working party. Usually, we ask for volunteers at the meeting where the review party is set up. Usually, we would say that it's taken from the membership of the panel first, but if there aren't enough people, then we could ask people outside of the panel, and they can join in, provided obviously they're not cabinet members, because they are prohibited from doing so. And then the cabinet, the chairmanship of, or the chairship of the working party generally can be done either way. So it could be that it's sort of mutually agreed at this at the first meeting where we set it up, but it could also, if it wanted to be, if they couldn't decide or we weren't overly fussed, for want of a better phrase, about who the chair was, then we could ask that that's be added to the first meeting of the working party. But I think it's something that both Charles and I have discussed, and it's something we've discussed with others, including the management team, is that I think, as I say, this and this is absolutely in no way a criticism of the way that this working group has been created or it started, but I think it would be just helpful for everybody involved and helpful for the panel to just sort of firm up the way that we create scrutiny working parties going forward. So I think in future, if there is a working party that's suggested and we agree that we should have a working party, then this meeting, say for example this is the first meeting of which we decide to do that, we should set up a rough idea of what that panel is going to do and who the membership are. That then would be referred to the working party. The working party would have a meeting that would solely just concentrate on their terms of reference. They would agree the terms of reference. As we've seen from this working party, terms of reference have slightly altered from what was originally planned. That's totally okay. That's not an issue. But if it is, then if it is wanting to change, then it should be the panel that decides that it changes, not the working party. So then we would bring that terms of reference back to this party, to this panel, sorry, and then we would have a last opportunity for anybody else to then say, well, yeah, I don't agree with that. You've changed the terms of reference of that so much that actually I wouldn't have voted for that. I wanted something else as the next priority working review. We can sort out the membership, and then from that point onwards, that is the terms of reference of the party, that is the membership of that working party. It doesn't change unless this panel says it should change. I think that would be the process moving forwards. We sort of do that, but sort of unofficially at the moment, and I think that's just something that we need to tighten up on.
Yeah, I agree. Could you bring that protocol to the next meeting for approval?
Absolutely, yeah, we can do that, that's no problem.
And just on that, because, coming new to overview and scrutiny and trying to understand where we're working on, having listened to the last two meetings, I wasn't clear what this working party was working on now. Councillor Pope has helped to sort of give that information as to what the terms of reference are. But if you're saying that the terms of reference that was informally set down at a meeting has changed and that it should be the main panel that agrees that, there's nothing in the agenda about that. So just... I don't understand it, so I think that protocol would be very useful, but just to say, as a new member trying to understand what's going on, it feels very, very complicated.
I think that's why we want to bring the protocol back to the next meeting, definitely.
Could I add as well that we had agreed that members of the working party would bring in the fresh terms of reference, draft terms of reference to this panel and seek the approval of the panel. So I was hoping that one of the members could sort of read out those for the panel to listen in and agree.
Councillor Davis.
If I could just, and it's to back Nick up and to perhaps reassure Councillor Scobie, the appointment of Councillor Austin as chair and so on was agreed by the working group in that meeting, so that when we had our first scoping meeting we were able to hit the ground running. So there isn't any, there is no lack of procedure, just perhaps a little lack of recording it, but it was agreed by this panel that Councillor Austin and who would be on it. From there, the scoping identified a need for perhaps a broader perspective, and that's where that's evolved from. So, anyhow. Do you want me to just read this per se, Charles, or?
Yeah, it's up to you, so that everyone
Okay, I'm going to read what's in front of me. It's not necessarily my words, but OSP Working Group on Grant Funding. Question, how do we maximise grant funding coming into Thanet? The aims of the group are to maximise grant funding coming into Thanet through identifying what we're doing or what we have done in the past that has worked well, avoiding what we are doing or have done in the past that hasn't, learning from feedback from infrastructure bodies, funders and voluntary organisations, considering how other comparable authorities work with their voluntary organisations and producing case studies and recommendations to Council. The proposed terms of reference are to report to focus on smaller grants, say up to 250,000 as the suggestion, to focus primarily on smaller voluntary sector bidders and how we can support them, to ask them and identify what information and skills they have and identify where gaps are, to ask town and parish councils, infrastructure bodies and funders reference their experience of working with Thanet organisations and what may help improve their success rates, to outline what has worked, what hasn't and how we can tailor support in future for greater impact without overburdening officers or creating significant extra costs. The proposed methodology is to firstly meet with key TDC officers to discuss how we work with voluntary organisations and to share information. Louise, Clive, Penny, Nicola and Natasha have indicated they'd like to engage in that process via Google Meets or in person as appropriate. To meet with infrastructure bodies, town and parish councils and funding sources, again through Google Meet where appropriate unless face-to-face is available. To meet with voluntary organisations and reference their experience and their needs. This may lead to be a longer session or an evening meeting and preferably face-to-face. We need to obtain lists of potential invitees from Louise and Nicola and the town and parish councils. Number 4 is to undertake desk research comparing different councils' approaches, and that's agreed to be the responsibility of all working group members to do individual research and report back. Number 5 is to put together case studies for the report, again shared responsibility amongst all working group members. What was agreed at our scoping meeting, if I can just digress slightly, was that we would probably do one live meeting and then one Google Meets meeting to back up what was agreed at each phase of the live meetings. And I think, Charles, you've been discussing with Tricia about how these can schedule and fit enough meetings in without overloading. Penultimately is to put together case studies for the report, if I may have already said that, sorry, but with, again, shared amongst all working group members. And finally, to compile the ultimate report and recommendations, which is all working group members with Charles, so that we can bring a set of conclusions back to the panel. We have also identified funding bodies to invite, infrastructure bodies to invite. At the moment, it's suggested that Funding for All, Stronger Kent, Safer Communities Alliance, Charity Mentors in Kent, Social Enterprise Kent, Kent Coast Volunteering, and others as may be recommended by councillors and officers during the identification process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we note that? Or?
Yeah.
Councillor Scobie.
Again, sort of from my understanding coming into this, because it's very difficult to follow the chain of thought here, literally in the minutes for the last meeting it says the chair confirmed and the panel agreed. That was it. So that's the first time I'm like hearing those terms. That's a huge piece of work. Yeah. I'm not suggesting, I don't know enough about this as to know whether that's needed or not, but it sounds like you're talking months worth of work there. And for me, is this coming from a point where there's been an audit report or particular historic issues around this? See, there is, fair enough, but if I look at some of the issues the council's dealing with at the moment, like poverty in Thanet or homelessness and the potential impact, or all 5 sort of priorities in the corporate plan, you know, the decision has been taken, so I guess it's sort of, you know, and the group has met, but that is a huge piece of work. You're talking about case studies, review of other bodies, you know, interviewing voluntary sector, interviewing council officers. That's a huge piece of work, and feels like it's grown substantially from one line on the minutes at the last meeting to now being a committee covering, you know, a large piece of work. And is that really what this panel wants the working party to be doing? I don't know.
I mean, I'd like to comment on some of the background. I mean, I have 2 connections to grant funding. One was my work with Charlton and the other one is Ellington Park, where I was actually asked to provide feedback on the success of the grant. And it was, I think, over $1 million, 1.4 million, I think it was, or 1.6. There were 3 attempts to get that grant application in, and I in my feedback, my hour-long feedback with it was Heritage funding, I think, I actually stated that I felt Thanet was losing out on grant applications in comparison to other sections of Kent. Indeed, Charlton had been approached to specifically put grants in so that certain charities could funnel money into Kent to make sure that we were receiving grant funding. And one of the statements I got back is that if you compared a place like Royal Tunbridge with Thanet, then we are way down the list of smaller grants coming into Thanet. And I think addressing the poverty issue is directly related to this, because I think if we can identify the need and the desire, then we stand a good chance of bringing more funding into some of our volunteer sectors, and as a consequence adding vital services to our community. Indeed, Charlton were invited, and they've been invited again, so we're now on I'm no longer with Charlton, but we're now on our fourth phase of Children in Need funding, or Charlton are, which is absolutely unheard of, and it's to keep that provision in Thanet, because they recognise there is a desperate need, and we're not actually getting the funding we need. So I think this is a really important thing for us to look at.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to look at, but if the panel feels that the terms of reference are taking it beyond what they expected, then I assume we can bring it back here and review it. And I would propose that we do that.
I would point out that the terms of reference, I understand the concern about the scope, however, it was quite clear from our scoping meeting how broad the issues were and how they were, and how this was a substantial undertaking. I would, however, remind all that it was the working party that were prepared to take it on, identified what they were happy to do. So I don't see why there should be any issues, so long as there's not an issue with officer time or anything. Those who are already on that party are happy with what we've committed to do. If anybody's got an issue with doing that, that's their issue, not the party's.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very helpful to have heard the, what's planned from the Working Party out loud here, but I think it would be much more helpful to have it as part of the agenda pack for the next meeting, just so we could consider it, and if we don't find any issues, we can just note it. But I think it's more appropriate for us as a panel to actually see everything written down. It does feel that there is a little bit of scope creep, but I'm just hearing it now, so I'm not able to look at it in detail. So I think it would be possibly, if that's what you're already proposing, to add it to the next agenda with it in the pack as well. That would be helpful for us to consider it fully.
I'm asking the panel if that's what they want to do. Are you proposing that?
I'll propose that then, yes.
Is that seconded?
I'll second it. I don't see any harm in that happening.
What are we suggesting, that our scoping work comes before the... Sorry, are we suggesting that the scoping work then comes before the full panel before we progress? In principle, I'm all for that, and because we fight, and stand on a transparency ticket, my only concern is how that affects Charles's work that he's done with the chair. We are on a fairly limited projected time frame on this, and doing that would put it back beyond the scope that we've agreed, where we were looking to bring the final reports back by the end of July, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was end of July for the write-up of the report and then to be presented to the panel at the August meeting. So, at the moment we had arranged just one meeting for the 6th of June, which I believe we can do away with so that the panel can consider these draft terms of reference at their meeting on the 18th of June.
Yeah, as I say, I think at the very worst of that, it's going to be pushed back. The final deadline will be pushed back by 4 weeks, which in council terms is not very far.
If it's only 4 weeks, then I'll withdraw that, or, you know, but obviously you understand the concern.
Can I suggest a bit of a compromise then? Because I think if, as Councillor Davis sort of said, if the panel have agreed to take on this work and stuff's already progressing, I don't think we want to stop that enthusiasm. And I take the point that Councillor Wing and others have said about the importance of this. For me, I just want to make sure that this doesn't become massive and gets delayed because we're waiting for interviews. So maybe we could, you know, I'm suggesting that maybe we agree the terms of reference as outlined by Councillor Davis, but we put a deadline for a report to come back at the latest by end of September, which means that it gives them an opportunity to do this work. If August is when we're looking at it, it gives a little bit of slip if somebody isn't available, but make sure that this panel has the opportunity to potentially do another working party later in this year and to consider other issues. You just don't want mission creep to also become deadline, keep on being pushed back because you want to gather more information.
I'm sorry, but I thought Charles had already read.
I don't think that's locked down yet. So the work.
Had already described a timetable for this. If we approve it now, there's already a timetable worked out. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair. But I think Councillor Scobie is saying if the compromise is that you agree the terms of reference as read out by Councillor Davis, and then that would certainly mean, it might mean pushing back the time when we will bring the report back to the panel to the September meeting. I think that's what he's saying.
Thank you, Chair. I completely object to any attempt to set us a definitive timeline at the moment, other than the democratically agreed time frame that the panel agreed to work to. Again, those doing the work have looked at this and agreed what we're going to do. I understand Councillor Scobie's got other areas of concern that he'd like to bring on. Well, the point scoring matrix, as we progress through the working year, will determine how that comes forward, and that's what the matrix is for. And I think to start judging what's happening here with the potential scope and impact of this would be wrong. So I think we just need to carry on down the path we've already, you know, set.
Chair, point of personal explanation on that.
No, we've got a proposal.
As a point of personal explanation.
That's been proposed and seconded to refer the scope as read out to the next meeting. All those in favour?
Chair, as a point of personal explanation under the Constitution, I get to respond to a comment made.
Not in the middle of a vote, I don't think. That's carried. Personal explanation? You're okay. We've also got a list of reports that we've asked for from officers. There is one in particular which is to be updated regularly about external funding for the regeneration projects. Now, we've asked for this a number of times and it hasn't happened. Now, is there a reason for that?
I don't know if would you like me to comment on that, Chair?
Yeah, please, yes, please do, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that we bought two very detailed reports on the programme, one at the end of last year, one early this year, providing quite a lot of detail about the progress of the regeneration projects across both the Margate and the Ramsgate programmes. And that was precursors to decisions that were then subsequently made at Cabinet. And secondly, we also gave commitment that we would bring detailed reports of all the projects that would progress through the regeneration programme as they were ready to do that, and we will still do that, and that's a commitment that we've given. We are also working on new project management arrangements, and I think some of you certainly were present at the briefing we gave last week about our proposals for project management, which I hope you agree will make a significant difference to the way projects are managed across the council, including those in the regeneration programme as well as others. And see, there's probably of equal significance and equal cost is the housing programme that's covered by that piece of work as well. And one of the things that we talked about in that briefing was the need to introduce a new reporting mechanism across the programme so that you can be alerted to significant projects that are either delivering on time or falling behind their programme or whatever the issues are. I think our view at this point is that you need a bit more than just a red, amber, green rating on projects, and you'll need some commentary on how we're delivering against each of those key projects. What we can't do, I don't think, is provide you with regular updates on everything that we're doing that falls into the heading of project management. That would just be far too much for the officers to be able to resource. But we can commit to do that on the significant projects of particular interest. As part of the project management framework, and we talked about this at corporate management team today, we're developing a size assessment tool for project managers to assess the impact of their projects, looking at a number of different things. So firstly, the level of expenditure. We've already got a mechanism where everything that's a key decision, so everything over 250,000 has to come here, has to go to Cabinet at some stage in its project lifestyle to get life cycle to get approval to spend that and commit that resource. But also, in addition to looking at project cost, we want to look at the level of risk and align the risk management in project management to the council's risk management framework. And identify those projects which present a high level of risk to the council. And in addition to that, take a view about how projects contribute either to the agreed corporate plan or impact on our communities, or there was another criteria we included, which has just escaped my mind for a moment. But that mechanism really it's a way for us to identify the projects that we think that are of most importance to you as a committee and to Cabinet and to other members to get updates on, and we'll be working on that through our new service planning process, which is happening over the next few months and flows from the agreed corporate plan. So I think there's a lot of work being done in this area. Obviously, I know the officers leading on the regeneration programme have been here a number of times and talked through all of the projects that they're working on. And before we commit expenditure on any projects that are above those spending thresholds, then there'll be opportunity to talk through those in detail here as well. So hopefully that gives the panel some reassurance that we are working on that, and it's certainly our intention to keep you as up to date as we possibly can on the programme.
It certainly reassures me. That's a very comprehensive answer. So long as you recognise that this body is meant to scrutinise the activities, that's fine. Unless anybody else wishes to comment.
Just one very quick comment, thank you, Chair, and it's just, again, just to highlight and remind that historically we seem to be not particularly good at retrospective scrutiny, and we don't indulge in free scrutiny, which is highly recommended in government guidelines. So the more we can be involved in the development of projects and everything, then, you know, but again, I'm not trying to preach to the converted or... Thank you, Chair.
Do members have any other questions to ask about the work programme? Councillor Scobie.
Just a suggestion, Chair, because I think we've got the opportunity to invite Cabinet members to future meetings.
Yes.
And I was just going to suggest that as it's been a year since the implementation of the new corporate plan and the new leadership of the Council, that whether it might be a good moment to invite the leader to come to either the June or July meeting to present progress on the corporate plan and the 5 priorities.
Is that a proposal?
It can be.
Is that seconded? I'll second that. That's seconded.
And it is a proposal.
Although...
I think this relates to our work programme, but it relates to the way we work in relation to our work programme. So I know Ingrid had sent us an update on the government guidance on overview and scrutiny. In my email back to her, I said it might be useful for overview and scrutiny to have an updated training session on those changes or anything of significance in that government report, which very often doesn't use layman's terms, to make us have a bit of understanding about what our role is here. We've had recent updates in licensing and planning that have been very useful. So I wondered if that was possible in the future.
Have members got an appetite for training? No? Go ahead.
Whether you've got an appetite for it or not. We're running a session on the 24th of July, which is part of the member training programme that came out to all members very end of last week, and that will be run as an in-house thing, and that's one of the things we will cover at that session, absolutely.
That closes the meeting. Thank you. What's this?
Those are the minutes.
The last meeting.
Yeah,
One will be during the day, one will be
Initial and then sign at the end?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I should say there's 2 dates. That, I can't remember which one that is.
No.
You should have got an email with the programme.
Not for scrutiny.
So do have a look, and it's all in there.
You still got it?